today is House File 100.
16 committee hearings, hours of public debate.
The majority of Minnesotans agree that the time to end marijuana prohibition is here.
I haven't done an interview like this before.
Okay.
Usually it's across.
Right, yeah.
This seems more comfortable,
Yeah.
more intimate conversation. So there are several regulations, including a measure that prohibits restriction on municipal county permits and sales for those who like to open shop locally for recreational cannabis, which was legalized, I believe, in August, correct?
August 1st of this year.
August 1st. Can you explain how all of that works?
Well, to become a licensed distributor,
Yes.
I think some of it's still in the works. It's going to be effective, I believe, starting in 2024. And the restriction, if I'm correct, the way it is right now, unless something changes, is for a county of, so our population's a little over 26,000 in Brown County. Mm-hmm. And I believe that the regulation will be, it's every 12,500 population that you can't limit it to. It could be one, or you can restrict it to one for that population. So with Brown County, it's a little over 26,000, that'd be three.
Okay.
The county would, someone wants to apply for a permit to become a distributor, they can do that.
So once they reach a limit of, like, say there's 3 dispensaries in the county, then they can say, well, no, we have our limit.
Yep.
And that's it.
Exactly.
Unless one goes out of business and another
That's
one in the
exactly
waiting
right.
list applies, something like that.
Yep.
Okay.
So it's not saying you have to have 3, it's just you can't, if there's only one person that applies to the entire county, then.
You have to set the
we've had
threshold
one.
at 3, in other words.
Correct.
Essentially.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Let me see here. What other questions do I have for you? Well, I suppose I could ask you this question too. How is just the county as a whole preparing for the change, or how did they prepare for the move away from cannabis prohibition as a matter of policy?
Right. Well, we kind of watched a little bit to see what other counties, what other municipalities were doing. We took, right now, really the only restriction is on where you can use it. It sort of mirrors the Clean Indoor Air Act, where the county can prohibit use in certain public places, those sorts of things. And so that we have an ordinance.
It's similar to the gun bans in a lot of places. In Minnesota, you'll see signs that say this business prohibits guns.
Yep, exactly.
on
Yep.
property.
And so this would be the county ordinance, the draft ordinance right now. It'll be up for a vote, I believe, at the next county board meeting. Limits where people can use cannabis in public.
Okay. Let's see here. This is probably more of a question for law enforcement, so we'll skip that one. Okay. So this one sort of relates to the question I asked you first about how the permitting and all of that goes. So there's really only a couple dispensaries in the state. Red Lake was one of them. I remember they were the first, right?
Yep.
Sort of taking advantage of their sovereign status.
Yep.
To get the process going quicker, I believe it was.
Sure.
And then another tribe, I believe, Leech Lake. I don't remember which specific
I think you're
one.
right. Yep, I think you're right though.
So with only 2 recreational options at this point, and I believe you made a comment too in a commission meeting, that it's kind of ironic that at the point we have legalization, mostly the way to get it is illegally.
Right.
So considering that that's the case, and there is some sparse medical dispensary sales, I believe Mankato has a medical dispensary, I believe.
So.
Will this process be so gradual that the illegal sales will still continue for some time?
I don't know how else you get cannabis products at this point. I mean, it's.
So as I read the media reports like NPR and a few others, ones that I've read, they say that the state's currently trying to figure out the business of cannabis.
Right.
So it's kind of like creating an industry at the state level.
Right.
As far as regulation goes, how long do you think all that is going to take to hash out?
Well, like I said, it's in the works to have the licensing figured out by 2024. So
Mhm.
hopefully, and that's kind of the comment I made at the board meeting. It seems like the legislature went around it about it a little backwards. They will legalize something for use, but the only way you can get it here right now is illegal. So to
Didn't
me, it seems
necessarily
like,
foster the industry level players first, do you think, or?
right. Well, that's what it seemed to me, is it's almost encouraging illegal activity to a point, because again, you've legalized something that the only way you can get it here is illegally. Why didn't we take a little more time and legalize the dispensaries first, get the people licensed, and then legalize the product?
Sure, and you spend some time with law enforcement and
Yep.
courts, so do you think that particular issue has caused some confusion or complexity for the law enforcement and the court side of it?
Right, I know it has, because I've already had officers and deputies approach me and ask, so going forward, what do we do on motor vehicle stops?
Mhm.
You can smell the odor of marijuana. It's now legal to possess it, but it's, how did they get it here? So you've got a product that they got here, or you suspect they had a product
Sure.
that they got here illegally, but, so
Just
there's
sort of
just a lot of
tracking down a
confusion.
plant would be very hard to do, because it's not like auto parts or
Right.
something, or catalytic converters, where you might be able to find the source.
Serial number, correct, yeah.
Sure, okay, maybe a particular strain or something. Yeah, the Supreme Court recently just ruled in Minnesota too that the smell of burnt marijuana odor now doesn't constitute probable cause. So has that clarified some things for law enforcement, or has it still, because like you said, how did they get it here? There is a federal ban.
Right,
So crossing state lines is still illegal.
correct.
And I kind of wanted to ask too about that, how the federal ban complicates all this.
Well, yeah, it creates a couple different issues. For one, to go back to your first comment, the smell alone does not establish a reasonable suspicion or probable cause to make an arrest. However, if it's combined with other things.
Mitigating factors, right?
Exactly, driving conduct, if they're effectuating a driving under the influence arrest, it's sort of the same with alcohol. The smell of alcohol alone is not enough to arrest someone, but if you combine that with bloodshot, watery eyes, slurred speech, the driving conduct, erratic driving, you're building probable cause to make that arrest. So it's the same. It's still a block. The smell of marijuana is still a building block to build probable cause.
Sure.
Just by
It just
itself.
can't be by itself as
Correct.
the,
Pull someone over for speeding, you smell marijuana, that doesn't necessarily, in and of itself only, the speeding and the smell give you probable cause to make an arrest for a DUI, but if there's, within a conversation.
so you bring up an interesting point, which is another one of my questions that I wanted to get to. And I did want to talk to the sheriff and you about this. So with that being the case, with what the Supreme Court said and how the rules go now, I want to kind of put this in perspective of historical timeline, right?
Yep.
So we have pre-August and post-August law.
Right.
So pre-August, was there a big focus on impaired driving for marijuana? And I know that the legislature gave $15 million to address training for law enforcement
Yep.
officers to I believe, find out who's driving erratically from marijuana use or whatever the case is.
Correct.
Anyway, train to maybe find some of those signs or signals.
Yep.
We've been doing that with alcohol for a very long time. And alcohol was prohibited at 1.2.
Sure.
But we've established that, and when I'm just doing basic research, trying to find cases of where they've possibly given out fines or tickets or convictions for impairment from things like marijuana or other drugs, I don't seem to find a lot of data.
Right.
Was that much of a focus before? Because the DUI thing with alcohol, I mean, still is an issue.
Right.
A big issue.
Yep.
Is there a switch on focus? Is there going to be a switch in focus on impaired driving now that marijuana has become legal? Has that become an impetus for other substances?
You know, I don't know about if there was more or less of a focus on it. I think when the substance was illegal, the chance that you pulled someone over and they were intoxicated on alcohol versus marijuana was probably higher with alcohol because it was a legal substance.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a different approach. Again, we've got a test, a per se test, a blood test, breath, urine, 0.08 or greater.
Yes.
So you can do that. You can get, with a breath test, you can get an instantaneous
So
result.
that evidentiary processes are a little bit more clear with alcohol.
Exactly. There's a limit. There's a per se limit that the legislature said if you're over this limit while driving or within 2 hours of driving, you are deemed to be under the influence. With marijuana, it's a different approach because they're, right now, you know, and maybe they'll be
And
developing
with the
that
federal
technology.
ban, there's not a lot of research capable of being done because unless it was a substance that they could actually get their hands on to study,
Right.
they haven't been able to.
And there isn't that same benefit of having an instantaneous test, because you could take someone's, you know, a blood test or even a hair follicle test and say, yep, you've got THC in your system, but the length that it stays in your system before it metabolizes is a lot longer.
And I believe there's different types of marijuana.
Right, different
There's,
strains, different-
and those affect different people in different ways, right?
Right, and the different potency, and that's one of the things now with the marijuana laws, and I think what a lot of people don't understand is the potency is so much higher than when,
These days.
for even when I was younger. You know, if you had some, you didn't have the vape at that point, you didn't have a liquid resinous form, you had hash or something that somebody had made out of marijuana, but, you know, a potent strain back then might have been a 10% or 12% THC.
Do you
Now,
think that the government could put caps on potency?
I think
Because
they
I think
could.
a lot of the potency that we see in today's marijuana comes probably from California's
Sure.
culture of cultivation and then their eventual commercialization of it.
Right.
I think I remember seeing a CNBC back one time that said that they produced up to a third of the United States' cannabis, and this was before legalization,
Sure.
even medically.
Yep.
So you think that might be one of the factors that
Might,
contribute
because-
to that?
Yeah, because again, you can get some of the THC concentrate that I've seen now is some of it's up 90% THC.
Yeah, a lot of the
And so-
hospitalizations have to do with edibles, I understand.
Yeah, and because it's so concentrated, I don't think people understand that. It's not the same as, again, back when I was young, if somebody smoked a joint, you know, green leafy, now with a 90% THC versus 10% back then, it's just night and day difference. And I don't
Yeah.
think people understand that potency and the effects that it can have. I did want to go back to one thing you said earlier
Sure.
about some of the complications, some of the collateral issues.
Yeah.
And Jason Seidel and I talked about this, is people that have permits to carry. We've seen an increase in the number of people that are applying for a permit to carry a concealed weapon.
Yes.
Well, that compounds the problem because, again, when you purchase, you have to do the federal background check.
Are you
for-
reading my questions?
No, was that one of your questions?
Just one of my questions has to do with the ATF, the federal
Sure.
laws on guns.
Yeah.
If you even lie on the federal application from the ATF, that's a federal felony.
Right, yep.
And they've stated that even if Minnesota legalizes cannabis and you're using it legally, you could still be committing a felony by possessing a firearm and ingesting cannabis.
Exactly. And
Now,
that's
how
the
does that
problem is-
be regulated?
Well, that's the
Because we're
thing.
talking about personal choice and
Yep.
accountability on, the government's not going to surveil people that closely.
Yep, well, and that's what, because when Jason and I talk about this quite often, because he sends me applications to review. Somebody that fills out an application for a permit to carry a concealed weapon, they have to go through Jason for those permits. And so you know, they'll ask me to look at their background, see if they qualify. Well, one of the disqualifiers is, you know, there's federal disqualifiers and then there's state disqualifiers.
Yeah.
Well, one of the federal disqualifiers is if you're a user of illicit drugs. Okay, so you'd be disqualified federally, but you're still, even though you qualify under the state of Minnesota for a firearms
The
carry
federal law
permit.
will supersede the state law in
Right.
those instances, right?
And certain folks, obviously law enforcement officers, even though that's a substance that's legal in Minnesota, a law enforcement officer in Minnesota could never use it because they would be banned from carrying a firearm federally. And so that's one of the issues that we run into is, and now Jason has to look and say, okay, I've issued all these permits. Now if a person gets pulled over and you smell the odor of marijuana, was that another step that we're gonna have to check? Are we gonna have to check and see whether they have a permit to carry a firearm?
Sure. And so, sort of a sidebar question I have about that is, could agencies drug test for an extra layer of the application? You know, the ATF has their own application and they don't require that.
Right.
But could an agency constitutionally, it might be tricky because you could, if you require somebody to do that, to take the test for your state regulations, is that kind of blocking somebody's constitutional
Yeah.
rights federally?
Exactly, and that's why I think you run up against the Second Amendment, because again, you know, there's some states that, I think recently New York had a law that said you had to show a reason why you needed a permit to carry.
Yes.
Well, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that, they don't need to have a reason, that's their Second Amendment right.
Second Amendment, yeah.
Well, but now you're mixing the two issues, is there is a federal, it's a crime, federal crime to smoke marijuana and, or possess it. So now, how does that work up against that Second Amendment right to carry possess a firearm?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how the District of Columbia is
Right.
managing this. They are right in the epicenter, legalizing a substance that
Yep.
the government, which is based there, doesn't want,
Exactly.
or at least doesn't have
Yeah.
legalized at this point.
And-
Do
and-
you expect the federal government will at some point just declassify marijuana from Schedule II illicit substances?
I
And
think.
would it be a Republican or a Democrat that does that? I guess that's a magical question, because it could be either one.
Exactly, yeah, and I think realistically, if you mentioned, you know, prohibition of alcohol back in the day,
Yeah.
it might get to be the point, a tipping point to where the federal government says, okay, out of the 50 states, there are 47 that have legalized it now. What's the point? What is the point of having a federal ban or having it listed as a federal scheduled drug
Sure.
when a majority of the states have already legalized it? And there, I don't know if it would matter who's in control of Congress at that point.
Are there financial incentives, do you think, between people who want it either legalized or illegal, and they don't really necessarily care about the moral or social implications?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's just how society works. I think there's
Yeah.
certain people that's always a consideration. You know, can we make money? And I don't want to attribute any nefarious reasons to the state. I think when the state did it, they looked at it and said, I don't think they looked at it as a money-making necessarily. There's always that consideration of,
Well, the
it's a
government's money is
tax,
our
right?
money, right? Yeah, I mean, it's a tax revenue source, but I mean, at the same time, so is criminalizing substances to a point too. You have to
Sure.
create jobs to do that, and in America, where there's lots of illicit drug use, there's lots of jobs that were created through that,
Right.
particularly throughout the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Okay, interesting. Just too bad Jason wasn't here, but we'll get him at least on the phone.
No,
for
and he
an interview.
did say, you give him a call, he'll definitely reschedule with you. He just had to go take care of that family business.
Sure, sure. It's definitely important. Well, I'm going to see if I have any other questions that I missed here quick.
Sure.
Then we'll let you go. About this. I think we covered it. You were pretty good at being proactive at getting to some of the core questions that I had, so I
Get some good
appreciate
questions.
that. Yeah. It made my job easy today. Yeah, I think that's everything, Jason. We covered it all.
Sure.
I appreciate your time.
I'm waiting for Jason.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're
Shocked.
good.
I'm sorry.
You're good.
I'm new here too, so I'm trying to get used to everybody's name. I know
Yeah.
the Nicollet County Sheriff, and so I'm
Oh.
going to interview.
So you work for the Nicollet County Ledger as well?
So I own the Nicollet County Ledger.
Oh, you-
The other company that
Oh.
bought it from the other guy, and then we sort of had some other issues with keeping it going because there was another partner. He's in Florida now, I believe, or somewhere. I don't know where he is,
Yeah.
but he's not here. So
So
I'm
you're
here,
the
I'm
man.
left over, I'm
There you
trying to clean it up and get it going.
And there you go.
Yeah, this was a story that we were covering sort of before.
Yep.
And then so I wanted to kind of revisit it. Yeah, but
And did Nicollet County have they done an ordinance?
I'm not sure about the county.
You know,
I
when
haven't
we- when we were-
I haven't seen a commission meeting now
Okay.
since like May, so I gotta
Oh.
catch up on my news over there.
Yeah, I know when we were collecting, as counties were developing their ordinances, we were kind of passing them around, well, here's Lyon County's version, here's Meeker County's version, here's.
Sure.
So it was kind of nice because then we could sort of put ours together, find the best things of theirs, and I couldn't remember if I saw Nicollet County's, but I am assuming at some point all 87.
It's
Something.
sort of an experiment right now, you think? I mean, anytime like, this thing's been illegal for almost 100 years.
Right.
I used to work at another newspaper in the Mapleton area. I was the editor there, and I would look through the old newspapers from like the late 1800s and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Cannabis was advertised in there a lot of the times.
Really?
The pharmacies sold it over the counter, like Tylenol.
Wow.
And so it's kind of interesting to like look at all this history
history
that's
is-
happened in between.
I just saw one Facebook friend posted, it was an actual prescription from a doctor, and I want to say it was for a cough. It was shot of whiskey, one shot of whiskey, 1 tablespoon of honey, 1 tablespoon of sugar, tablespoon, and then but he prescribed a shot of whiskey.
Yeah, that was an anesthetic and problem solver for a lot of things. I believe anything.
Exactly.
You need your leg sawed off, they would give you
Here, take a
some
shot.
whiskey.
And then pour a little on the wound itself.
There you go. All right, Chuck, appreciate your time.